two of a kind soul sister. I'm keeping my eyes on you. I bet you think I don't know nothing but singing the blues. Oh, sister, have I got news for you? I'm something. I hope you think that you're something too. Oh, girlfriend, I've been up that lonesome road and I've seen a lot of suns going down. Oh, but trust me, no low life's gonna run me around. So let me tell you something, sister. Remember your name, no twister. Gonna steal your stuff away, my sister. We sure ain't got a whole lot of time. So shake your shimmy, sister. 'Cause honey, this sub is feeling fine.
Good evening. Welcome to In Search of the Color Purple, a conversation with Salamisha Tillett and Jacqueline Mattis. Tonight's event is co-hosted by the Department of African American and African Studies and Newark Black Women Writers Workshop in partnership with Source of Knowledge. My name is Sherry Ann Butterfield, and I am the Executive Vice Chancellor at Rutgers University, Newark. And it is my profound pleasure and honor to introduce two of my favorite people ever, Dr. Salamisha Tillett and Jacqueline Mattis. These are two women who embody what it means to be agents of change, inspiration, strength, resilience, beauty, and overall fierceness. The great Alice Walker once said, the most common way people give up their power is by thinking that they don't have any. One of the many reasons why I adore these two women is that they spend their days and their nights empowering people, especially young people, girls and women, and reminding them of their power so they can realize and step into their own brilliance. Now, a little bit about them individually. Dr. Salamisha Tillett is the Henry Rutgers Professor of African American and African Studies and Creative Writing at Rutgers Newark. She's the Associate Director of the Clement A. Price Institute and the Faculty Director of New Arts Justice at Express Newark, as well as a contributing critic at large for the New York Times. She's a busy woman. In 2003, with her sister Shahrazad Tillett, she founded A Long Walk Home, an art organization that empowers young women to end violence against girls and women. She is author of an amazing, wonderful new book, In Search of the Color Purple, the story of an American masterpiece, which is what brings us here tonight. Dr. Jacqueline Mattis is Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at Rutgers Newark. And it has to be stated that along with Vice President Kamala Harris making history yesterday, Dean Mattis made history this past year as the first Black Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences and the first Black woman or woman of color of the largest school at Rutgers Newark in its 75-year history. Prior to assuming the role of Dean of SASN this year, Dr. Mattis served as Professor of Psychology and Associate Department Chair for Diversity Initiatives in the Department of Psychology at the University of Michigan. She is a clinical psychologist who explores the factors that contribute to volunteerism, civic engagement, altruism, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, optimism, and positive parenting among urban residing African American and Afro-diasporic people. Jackie and Salamisha, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And thank you for making us all better people just for knowing you. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Salamisha, who's going to do a reading before the conversation begins. Ladies, take it away.
Thank you so much, Christina and Sherry Ann. First of all, I would just like to say that Sherry Ann, all of those adjectives that you use to describe Jackie and me are applicable to you as well. So it's just an honor to be able to be at Rutgers University, Newark at this moment in time, as well as, just being the good company of so many fierce Black feminist leaders. And oftentimes when Black women lead, their labor and their intellect and their emotional output is unrecognized. But here we can say at Rutgers Newark that that is not necessarily the case. And so I'm just honored to be here with you, as well as Jackie. Okay, so I'm going to read part of what I have written and part of from the introduction to In Search of the Color Purple: A Story of an American Masterpiece. I just want to make sure everyone can see me. So I just want to make sure my gallery view. Okay, great. The first time I read The Color Purple, I was 15 years old and spending the summer in Boston with my dad, preparing to apply for early decision to the University of Pennsylvania. I had just been let go from my part-time canvassing gig at the Environmental Law Center because my boss realized that I was too young to be knocking on people's doors well past dusk. Since it was too late for me to pick up another summer job, I ended up answering phones, sorting mail, and volunteering at the local NAACP office. During my breaks, I'd pick up the latest weekly books that my cousin's tall, light brown-skinned girlfriend Nicole gave me to read. She was only 2 years older than me, but already an English major at Penn herself, and sensing that I was on the verge of an identity crisis, she felt obligated to help me build up my armor of African American literature. In turn, 3 books in particular determined my fate. Alex Haley's The Autobiography of Malcolm X, Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, and Alice Walker's The Color Purple. By the time I returned home to New Jersey and to my suburban private high school that fall, I felt armed with a new vocabulary of racial pride and Black feminism. Walker's protagonist, Celie Harris, a dark brown-skinned African-American girl born in segregation, made the book all the more fascinating to me. Dear God, Celie opens the novel. I am 14 years old. I have always been a good girl. Maybe you can give me a sign letting me know what is happening to me. What Celie was unable to name was the fact that the man she had called Pa repeatedly raped her as her enfeebled mother wasted away in the next room. You better not tell nobody but God, he warns. It'll kill your mammy. By creating a protagonist who was a victim of racism and repeated rapes, and also a figure who was eventually able to break her silence and tell her story on her own terms, Walker turned Celie into one of the most original characters in all of literature. I've gone back to The Color Purple many times since that summer of 1991, after I was raped by an African-American fraternity boy whom I was dating during my first year of college, and again after I was sexually assaulted by a near stranger on my college study abroad program in Kenya. Years later, after struggling with an eating disorder, contemplating suicide, and going to intensive therapy, I poured all my anger and heartache in my poem, Do You Know What Rape Feels Like? As I retold my trauma, I lead directly into Walker's words. Midway through my poem, I began, in great detail, to break down the intimate horror of my rape. Do you know what it feels like to have our howl silenced by a fist? When you are rushed into, pressed down on, and opened by a knife, a blade so thick, so strong, so brilliant, that your insides no longer exist, that your scraped against insides bleed out into a yell that only you and others like you can hear. Screaming until it stops, no, until you think it stops, and then from nowhere, from no one, it keeps on. He continues to destroy your petals with his, you don't even want to say it. I broke my silence because of The Color Purple. At every stage of my healing, I found something new in the novel. unseen themes or turns of phrases that I ignored in previous visits. When my sister asked if she could document my healing with her camera, I handed my poem over to her. A few months later, when she adapted her photographs and my story into the stage performance Story of a Rape Survivor, our actress, Rachel Walker, gave life to my words and let Celie's words be her creative guide. If Celie gave voice to my rape in my teens and early 20s, it was Shug, in her bodiness and bodily confidence, whom I needed in my 30s, as I entered a belated phase of sexual experimentation and exploration. And among the pantheon of Black women characters whom I introduced to my students when I first started teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, Shug meant the most to me. Her sexual fluidity and unabashed desires gave me permission to experiment unapologetically with men and women and long for more. Now I live differently with The Color Purple, a lot more healed, yet still tender. I revel in Sophia's anger. Her rage at being doubly oppressed as Black and woman fuels me as I raise and protect my Black children, a 5-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl, in our age of unbridled racism. In this book, but especially on screen and in the book, but especially on screen and on stage, Sophia captures my imagination and dares me to be more like her. This is why every time I pick up the novel, even the one I teach from, this is it, covered by pastel stickies and with dog-eared pages, I feel as if it is for the very first time, finding and falling in love with a new moment that I somehow missed before. I tried not to carry the enormousness of the novel's meaning for me when I finally met Alice Walker. I wasn't sure if I should remain professionally detached and not disclose my experience with sexual assault, or if I should tell her that I've read every poem, essay, short story, and novel that she'd published since 1970, and that she, more than any artist I've discovered before or after her, gave me permission as a Black woman to be a full-fledged feminist. I was so afraid that my euphoria would spill out or that I'd fumble, that when my sister and I approached her haiku-inspired house standing atop the hill, only a bunch of periwinkles standing between us and her, I did not hug Alice or thank her for writing the book that made my healing possible. Instead, I put on my writer's cap, introduced my sister as a photographer, and began to take notes. Gone were Alice's long locks. Now a short silver mane crowned her head, and she walked with an unbelievable lightness. And when she took us out to the back porch of Temple Juke, the name that she used for her house in our email correspondence, we 3 Black women stood silently together. Alice on the verge of her 75th birthday, Scheherazade, a newly minted 40-year-old, and I in my 44th year, looked out to see only a crescendo of mountains standing between us and the horizon. After a minute, a deep inhale, and with a wry smile on her face, Walker asked, "Why do we need heaven when we have this?" And when I turned my head to catch her question, I realized that Alice Walker was the freest Black woman I'd ever met. That's my reading.
It's so much more powerful to hear you read it than even the power of reading it on page. So let me add my welcome to everyone who's joining us today, to Salamisha's and to Sherry Ann's, and I'll echo Salamisha's message that Sherry Ann Butterfield is somebody who is certainly our eyes and in the eyes of so many, a luminary for all the right reasons. Just a sister of the heart, somebody who really dedicates her everyday life to making sure that others are cared for in the ways that we all want to see this world care for others. And so it's great to be able to have this sisterhood as a starting point. So I'm going to start with sisterhood. And let me also start with it was such a joy to read In Search of the Color Purple. And one of the things that Salamisha and I talked about was making this a conversation, a sort of sisterly conversation in the tradition of Black women. And so let's do that, right?
And can I say one of the things that I'm really excited about? Two things. One, that I have the good fortune of knowing Jackie's sister. Before I met Jackie, I knew her sister and fell in love with your sister, Nadine. So we do have the real connection of sisterhood. And then this is probably a factor that many people would not know, but Dean Mathis, when she wrote her master's thesis, she used The Color Purple and Beloved. It was on those. So I thought, what a wonderful person to be in conversation with as a psychologist who turned to these books to kind of understand how Black people and Black women in particular heal. So we would love to talk about what conclusions you came to and why you turned to those books in your research as well.
Yeah, no, so let's do it.
Okay.
So here's a question that sort of bubbled up for me, right? Because sisterhood and relationships mean so much to you. And I think for anybody who knows you, that bubbles up like immediately. You genuinely love people, and you are really present. When you're in the presence of anyone, you are fully present, and that it's just a beautiful thing to be a part of. So as I think about like this work, and you described that moment of meeting Alice Walker, and the fact that you revisited The Color Purple because it was so central to your healing. So what does healing mean for you? Like when you think about that word and the experience, how has your journey through reading The Color Purple and having it a part of your life, how's that shaped like how you're thinking about what it means to heal?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really beautiful question and powerful question. Well, I think I used to think healing, and this is a very long time ago now, but when I was sexually assaulted my first year of college, I thought healing was something that could happen quickly, right? I think a lot of people still believe that, but it's something that, like it's like maybe a medical wound where something you can cure and that you can fix, and then you can move on from it. And I'm thinking of yesterday when President Joe Biden in his inauguration speech said to heal is to remember, right? And that's like a really powerful way of thinking about healing. And for me, I think I came to that understanding through Beloved, similar to you, and then through my own practice of having to be in intensive therapy. And so after I was so I'll just give you a quick answer, and then I'll relate to The Color Purple. When I came back from Kenya and I was sexually assaulted in Kenya, I had this is a good fortune of being part of an experimental treatment program in Philadelphia that treated PTSD survivors. What was a technique that was usually used on Vietnam vets. They were experimenting with rape survivors. And so I was in this experimental treatment program my senior year of college. I would leave the University of Pennsylvania campus, go to the Veterans Hospital, and then go across town to another hospital where they were doing this. And Edna Foa was the psychologist. And I'd spend all this time in therapy recounting my story, right? So there was a sense that to tell the story over and over again and to integrate that into who I was in the present somehow freed me from the past, but also meant that I would be able to carry that story with me in my future. Yeah. And if you think about what The Color Purple is, it's not a novel that suggests that Celie in any way has to forget her past in order to heal. But it's a novel that really requires all of the characters within it to confront who they are in the present and then try to find love with that knowledge of that pain. So it doesn't forget the pain, right? It's like to heal is to remember. It remembers the pain, but somehow through love and healing and prayer and ritual and sisterhood that you can see another opportunity, another day. And so that's what I think. I didn't know that that's what The Color Purple was going to give me. And that's why I talk about it in the book. I was sexually assaulted after reading The Color Purple, right? It's like the year later. And so what Celie somehow gave me was an opportunity to understand the long journey of healing, and also just think that healing is an incomplete and ongoing process. And I think in a culture where we want quick fixes, it's really difficult to think about the thing that you didn't choose to happen to you, right? Like that's what trauma and sexual assault is. It's something you had no choice over, and yet you have to figure out how to integrate it into who you are. That's the healing, and that's the journey that I think The Color Purple so masterfully does. And I think more than any other Beloved does it, but it's very different. The Color Purple gives you a whole world in which the characters who inflict harm and the characters who are the victims of harm have to work through that together, which is pretty radical still. I mean, we don't know what that really looks like as a nation, much less as individuals, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned Beloved, and it's one of so Beloved and The Color Purple are my two favorite books of all time. And
yeah.
when you mentioned remembering, right, as part of not only what Joe Biden talked about, but your own experience of this journey of healing. One of the things that stands out for me is in Beloved, Toni Morrison talks about rememory, right, which is remembering, but sort of being able to put the pieces back together perhaps differently than they came initially. And you're making me think about the fact that Alice Walker talks about sort of having gone back into her past, picked up her relatives, because one of the things, and I want to talk with you about this, one of the things I didn't know about The Color Purple is like, these are her people, these are her family members, right? So she goes back in the past, she collects their stories, she brings them into the future or in her present, where they didn't live, right? And some, like one of the members is her mom, but she gives them opportunities to be what they couldn't be in the past, right? So Celie in the book has this kind of redemptive moment, and she talks about the fact that in real life, Celie didn't necessarily have that, or the person, her family member. So how do you think about, so it's not just about memory, it's about memory plus.
Yeah,
It's
true.
about putting it together differently. So how do you?
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful question. Yeah.
Right. How do you make sense of the right of all of us to do that extra work, and how do you make sense of that?
Well, I guess there's a scene in my book that Jackie's referring to, which is really, really poignant, because so the first day I interview Alice Walker, we don't talk about The Color Purple. We're talking about a poetry collection that she had released last year. And so and I'm like, trying to prime her to talk about The Color Purple the next day, because it's a 2-part interview. And she says to me at the end of that interview, and I put this in the book, like, what else is there to say about The Color Purple? Like, what new thing can I possibly say about The Color Purple? And I'm like hyped, because I'm like, yo, that's like, well, I'm here. So I got lots of things that we could talk about with The Color Purple. So anyway, we come back the next day, and it's a really much more, she knows who Scheherazade is, she knows who I am, and we have this picture that I have in my trailer where I'm like on the couch with Alice, we're under a blanket. It's a completely different vibe for an interview. And then we talk about Celie being based on her grandmother, Rachel, and she starts crying, right? She starts crying when she thinks about the life that Rachel lived and how important it was for her not to give Rachel another ending, but that the role of art is sometimes to imagine alternative futures for individuals, right? And so that's the difference between memory, I guess, and art, right? That's where you veer off from remembering the past as perhaps it could have been or was, and reimagining the past as something else. And so when she fills in Rachel's story through the character of Celie, she does liberate her grandmother from, she describes it as drudgery and pain. And so that was really just like an amazing moment for me, because I never knew, I don't know why. I mean, I feel like I knew so much about The Color Purple, and then you find out, how much it was her step grandmother, but her grandmother Rachel, who was a very quiet woman, and so she wanted to give Rachel an ending that she hadn't had in the real world. So that's one thing. And then the character Albert is based on her grandfather, and so if you're familiar with Alice Walker's oeuvre, her first book, The Third Life of Grange Copeland, in many ways goes through this redemptive arc with her grandfather. But he's not the main character in The Color Purple. He's present, and he's important, but she wanted to give the power of the story to this young girl who becomes a woman named Rachel Little, and as we know her as Celie. So I thought that was just remarkable. But I think that your point is that's the difference between imagination and memory, perhaps, that we can create different worlds. And then when you create that different world, someone like me comes along or someone like you comes along, and then it actually changes our present, right? So it's like, you know, I think artists, and particularly Black feminist artists and Black people who are committed to liberation, are always banking on the future, right? Like they're fighting for a freedom that's delayed and that's going to be given to one or two generations at best, that they may not even have contact with. And so I think what's interesting about The Color Purple too, in terms of memory and imagination, is just the way time is used, right? Like it's set in the 20s, it comes out in the 1980s, and now we're talking about it in this moment of 2020. And these are all markers of actually really important moments for Black women. If you think about the blues women in the 1920s as figures who had a sexual freedom that was unseen before, and who were navigating all of these really exciting possibilities at the same time that they're navigating structural racism through segregation and patriarchy. And you see that in the character Shug. And then you have these women in the 80s, these Black women writers like Alice Walker, going back, trying to find a foremother for themselves, and they're turning to the 1920s. And then you have someone like me in 2021 going back, trying to find a person for me, and I'm recovering, or not recovering, but I'm engaging the story of The Color Purple.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. You make me think about the question of, is there something about us as Black women that brings a particular something to this process of redemption and memory and forgiveness and healing, that because of the fact that we're embodied Black and that we have the particular histories that we have?
Yeah, there's a quote here that Alice says, she told me it was in an interview that she gave in the 80s. And she talks about Black women being so at the bottom of the hierarchy, right? That it's like white men and white men, white women, Black men, Black women, that positionality enables Black women to see things differently. And it was like a great, because I was like, oh yeah, like that's what I'm trying to convince people of. If they could like just listen to us and hear what we are saying, we see how glorious the world could really, really be. So I don't know if it's, so your question is if there's something particular about Black women embodying Blackness and embodying variations of how we think of womanhood. Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's something really, these are not like biologically determined realities, but these are as a result of our position politically and our position socially, that we have a extra insight, I think. You know, if we talk about, Du Bois talked about second sight, then imagine Black women got like fourth sight, or I don't know what the word is, but like we got extra powers, you know, because, and what's interesting is that like Celie, a character who is so invisibilized in the society and yet is so full. I mean, that's also what's really interesting about The Color Purple, is like you have a character who is so disregarded by everyone around her, except for Nettie, and then Shug, and also Sophia, right? And so whose sense of justice should we trust? Should we trust everyone who does not understand, or who refuses to see Celie, or who relegates her to the dustbins? Or those women who do see her and how rich that universe and that world is? And so I guess for me, I'm always trying to, as an activist and as a teacher and as a writer, I want us to live in that world that Shug and Sophia and Nettie and Celie create together, because I think it's so just and so rich and so honest. And if we came from that world and we lived in that world, how truly democratic we would be.
So, I mean, given that, why is it so hard for people to listen to us?
I don't know. I should ask you, why is it so hard for people? I honestly have always wanted to have this conversation with a social psychologist, to be honest, because I think I mean, why is it so hard for them to see us? That's
Yeah.
like the first part. And I think there's just, there's all these, like, there was a study that came out this summer about why it's hard to center Black women in social justice movements, because on the most, like, they do those kind of like those tests in which they see these silhouettes. And even if it was a silhouette of a Black woman, they assumed it was a Black man. So it's impossible for people to like just see Black women.
Yeah.
And therefore our experiences are insignificant. But
Yeah.
what do you think? Why is it so hard? Because, and I know you've been struggling with this question too, but why is it so hard?
Yeah. I wish I knew. So the thing that sort of, the thing that I used to talk to my sister about this, and I know my sister's here as a part of this conversation because she loves you.
Yeah, and I love her.
She's amazing. So so when my sister used to work on Wall Street in a brokerage firm, and one of the things that we would talk about a lot is the fact that she was the only Black person anywhere around, right? And the folks would project onto her all these things that had nothing to do with her. And to get to, and we talked about what it means to be somebody else's mirror all the time, especially when you didn't give them permission to project onto you, right? Which we often don't, we usually don't. So, I think that, so for me, I think there's something about us as Black women that people feel both license and opportunity to project onto us a lot of the things that they are most afraid of in themselves. And I don't know what it is about us as Black women that allows them, that makes them feel like they have the permission to do that. But I see that so often, that when, when people are angry, they call us angry. And, we may just be going about our day, just trying to, smell the roses, etc. But I think there is something about how we are embodied that, and there's also something about the kind of joy that we experience and express when we're together, that people find both enticing and frightening. So I know when I get together with girlfriends of mine, and you just have that belly laugh, right? That the kind of laugh that I don't see other women from other communities often doing. And it's not because it doesn't happen, I just don't see it. But there's something about the ways that we live fully and joyfully when we feel safe, that invites a certain sense of extreme with us, that allows people to both see us as mirror and see us as something that they want to push away. But it's all speculation. I am not sure. Even as someone who was a clinical psychologist and who did that work for a while and then was like, I can't do this anymore, I will be a researcher studying these things. It was something that I always struggled with. Yeah.
I like this idea though. When you talk about Black women being in the company of each other, which at its best is a really safe space. But I also think it goes back to this idea of being seen, right? Like that's when a lot of, as an activist, a group of us started this Freedom Fund for Black girls this summer. And it's like, who else would do it but Black women? Like, honestly, like who else sees Black women fully but other Black women? I wish it weren't so. I wish, there was this whole universe of people that really saw us and recognized us. The way that we can see Amanda Gorman, but I imagine all the moments before we could see Amanda Gorman yesterday, of all the times that she wasn't seen, right? So when she arrives, it's like, what a miracle. But in fact, there are probably countless moments when she was underestimated, unrecognized and unheard, right? And she's 22. So this is a remarkable moment for her at 22. But I imagine that despite her genius, that there was countless moments that she probably can tell us in which someone didn't understand what they were seeing and therefore didn't see it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's also what's interesting about the color purple. One of the things I read about in the book is the artist Mickalene Thomas, and speaking of mirrors, so she has these amazing museum wall-sized paintings of the color purple that she used acrylic. So what she did was a very elaborate process, but she took photographs, still screenshots of the film of Shug and Celie's these very intimate moments between them from the film. And then she did this complicated process of reversing it and then adding and then using acrylic mirrors and to render the image for us to see. And so her whole thing was just like, you know, she wanted us to see ourselves in Celie and see ourselves in Celie's longing for Shug. And so that's another way in which it's kind of reverse of what you're saying, right? That what does it mean for us to have to see ourselves fully through the gaze of Black women, both the artist McLean Thomas, but also the character Celie, played by Whoopi Goldberg. And so I think there's so much possibility if people don't project, but in fact see themselves through our eyes. I mean, it's quite enormous and filled with glory, I would say.
Yeah, no. I mean, you mentioned Amanda Gorman, who's amazing, right?
Yeah.
So yesterday was so beautiful in a lot of ways, but particularly because of what she sort of brought to the moment. But and it makes me think about the fact that there's a way in which when we are being magic or we're being sort of made magic, that people can hold us. But when it's in the sort of everydayness that we sort of come with, it's harder. So Amanda talked about the fact that she has speech pathologies, and that she sort of had to overcome those. And you're making me think about when she's in school as a 4th grader or in 11th grade and she's struggling to say her R's or say her T's, then she's just the normal everyday Amanda, who nobody can see as magical. But in these moments when she is sort of on the center stage, the ability of people to see Black girl magic in those moments is so much more profound and concentrated than when we're doing our magic in everyday ways, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't seem to translate, right? So to me, I would see Amanda Gorman and I'd be like, whoa, like how many other Amanda Gormans are out there? Like who like, but it just seems to be like there's an exceptional person, Kamala Harris or Amanda Gorman, and it doesn't lead to an over appreciation of everyday Black girls or Black women, or even near exceptional Black girls or Black women. And I always think that's interesting. Like to me, they're not the exception to the rule. They prove the rule, right? They prove that there are countless ways in which we do not recognize the beauty, but not just beauty in the kind of this physical sense, but beauty in the kind of really full of dignity and brightness and genius. Like we just overlook all of that, I think, as a society. I think, there's so many reasons, I guess, we're trying to elucidate why that would be. But it's also just like, when I started doing work with Alarm Coleman, and particularly the Girlfriends program, I realized that how I too was part of, I had to learn to see Black girls, right? Because part of it is like, we are invisible to ourselves. And so that's a thing, right? To be invisible to yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what Celie was. She was invisible to herself. And Nettie was didn't have enough time for Celie to see herself, right? She was taken away and pushed away. And through her letters, they begin to see each other. But it does take Shug to come and see Celie. And then Celie can then see herself. And then there's so much that happens as a result of her seeing herself, her relationship to her body and her sexuality, her relationship to Albert Change. I mean, there's so much that happens to that character when she begins to see herself and understand herself on the terms that she would like to live on.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Nettie, and we talked earlier about our sisters, right? We're both really close to our sisters. How do you understand sisterhood as a part of the healing enterprise, right? And especially as you came to know it through The Color Purple with Celie and Nettie, and then Sophia and her sisters. And I know, and I want to talk with you about Cher's photographing you through your journey. But how do you understand the role of sisters in becoming whole?
Yeah, thank you. There's all this emphasis, particularly in France, I suppose, but here in fraternité, right? That brotherhood is the kind of, in France, it's liberté, égalité, and fraternité, right? So these are the basis of a democratic way of seeing things. And I've always been interested in, so I'll give you two different examples in sisterhood. So we have Celie and Nettie, but we have by extension Sophia, I think, is part of this
Yes.
sisterhood.
Yeah.
But a long time ago, I did this, just has nothing to do with The Color Purple, but it has to do with sisterhood. Presentation. My dear friend Brittany Cooper was on that. We were just excited to do this, like at American Studies Association. We just wanted to write about Venus and Serena, so we just did a panel on Venus and Serena. And I thought, I said in this moment, when Venus and Serena play against each other, you have two people playing at especially their first couple of matches, but they have a long career playing against each other. You have two people who are playing against each other, both determined to win and yet determined to see each other, right? Like, so there's a way in which you can, like, what a model for difference that is, what a model for respect that is, what a model for a non-domination, even so you can want to win and yet also kind of cheer for the other person. Yes. And in a society that we have where, you know, it's completely capitalist and individual success is the most dominant thing. And then you have these two women who gave us a different model and they continue to play, but they haven't played each other in a while. But for me, who came of age with them, that was remarkable to see. I didn't know you could, you know, I didn't know that could be a practice in sports, which is another way of saying a practice in politics. So there's that. So that's just one like obvious example. But then my relationship with my sister, and this goes back to your question of her with the photographs, which you didn't ask, but I'm going to fill it in. So Scheherazade started photographing my healing from sexual assault in 1998. And it was a pure sister act, right? She was in a social documentary class. She went to Tufts, but she spent a semester at Mason Gross at Rutgers and taking photography classes. And so she was in a social documentary class. And I was in the kind of peak of healing, in the sense I was in therapy twice a week. My whole apartment had all these images of like healing. And I was just really engaged in that process quite actively, spiritually, and in terms of psychotherapy. And so she began what then changed both of our lives, right? That this simple act of wanting to document my healing at a time when that wasn't kind of a thing. Like, people weren't going around, you know, documenting sexual assault survivors. She had no templates. The only ones that she had were people who had photographed cancer survivors, and her teacher had photographed a family who that were HIV positive. He had photographed them. Steve Hart is his name, for 7 years. So those were her models. But that simple act of sisterhood, that act of I will help you heal, and that then becomes a basis of an organization, A Long Walk Home, and then that becomes something that we then channel through the young people that we work with and the artists that we work with. Like, sisterhood becomes our political foundation and our ethical foundation. So I just think there's just so much. I don't know. It's like, you know, if you don't have a sister, it probably sounds extremely effusive, but it's, I think, something about sameness and difference at the same time that I think there's so much possibility for like citizens to live out. And then just a small fact, which I never got to do this, but I was on a panel with Maya Harris a couple of years ago at Time's Up. And we were like committed to doing something on sisters, because we're like, everyone should just like talk about sisters. You know, obviously they have a very close relationship as sisters. But it was such a like, I was like, yeah, like no one knows. Like, it's just so deep, sisterhood. It could be the template or the blueprint for like political organizations and for societies. And so I guess that's what I'm trying to articulate through the Venus and Serena. Like, how do you have difference and sameness at the same time without it being about domination and conquest?
Yeah, no, it's
Well, what do you think about sisterhood?
I mean, like my first reaction is I can't imagine a world without my sister in it, right? And I think there are ways in which, at least for me with my sister, and I'm going to project this out onto sisters who are close, because I know that there are lots of sisters who are not close to each other. There's a way that your sister can hold your story that nobody else can, and you trust in it, right? So like, there are things that my sister knows about me. We slept in the same bed for most of our childhood, right? There are things that you talk about, and ways that you talk, and ways that you laugh, and access to each other. So every picture from me, if you ever see any childhood pictures of me and my sister, our fingers are sort of interlaced with each other. So there's a way in which, like, my self begins where her self begins. And so like I can trust her with my stories. I can trust her with myself in a way that makes me think about like when I think about Sharon, you, it makes sense that she's the one who could hold the image of you when you couldn't hold the image of you. And because my sister does the same thing for me. Like when I've lost sense of who I am, Nadine is the one who kind of slips in with the, let me tell you about what this moment looks like. Let me tell you about who you are. And that's, I wouldn't trust that many other people with that. And there are girlfriends of mine who have become sisters, who I trust to be able to do that. But I wouldn't trust other people in the same way. So I think there's a continuity of spirit that happens with sisters that that allows for when the pieces of you start falling apart, they're the best ones situated to hold them and put them back in place. Yeah, both because you give them access, but also because what they story is going to feel more like you when the story gets told than if somebody else did it and they're projecting onto you other things that is like, nah, that ain't me.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, no, but I'm captivated by the storying like that Cher did with you, and the fact that she made it into a play, and that movement from a life to a story to a play, or the performance of the story for the public, is like it's mirrored in The Color Purple, right? So it's what Alice Walker also did, and she had to make sense of how the story gets told differently, and what it means when you suddenly have a public responding to your story, which is private, right? And so that public-private divide gets kind of blurry, and it's an interesting thing to have to navigate when you become so public. And so, like for me, it's a question back to you around like, how do you deal with you've written a story, you've written a book that crosses this private public divide. It's a really deeply personal book, right? And you already started talking earlier about your experiences of rape and sexual assault, but also your experiences of geeking out on meeting your heroes, right? Like, or sheroes. So, but for me, like going to the Alice Walker piece and the book, how do you deal with that, the privateness becoming public in the book? And how do you see it mirrored, if at all, in Alice Walker's privateness becoming public as her book goes from book to movie to play to movie to play?
No, that's a great question. I actually will talk about her. So the title is In Search of the Color Purple, which comes from her book, and In Search of Our Mother's Garden, which was the first book that comes out after The Color Purple. So The Color Purple comes out in 1983, and then In Search of Our Mother's Garden, I think, comes out in 1984. And it's her first creative nonfiction book. Yeah. It's a set of essays. There she defines womanist, which becomes, a very important term for Black women who see themselves as feminists. She has an essay in there called that she reprints there called Looking for Zora. Her quest for Zora Neale Hurston, and I name my introduction Looking for Alice from that. And then she also talks about, she has a beautiful essay that was so important to me about how The Color Purple came to her. Now, if you read Alice Walker's creative nonfiction, her essays, there's lots of writers who do this. Baldwin does this, Audre Lorde does this, Alice Walker. They're so personal in their essays. And so which is another way of saying that they're so honest in their essays. And so I'm reading all of this stuff by Alice Walker, and she's still so much more honest than I'm private in lots of, and she's an introvert and a recluse. So there's that. But on the page, she is so open and so vulnerable. I'm not talking about the fiction or the poetry. I'm talking about the actual essays. Yeah. And so I'm reading these things, and it pushed me to become more public. And I'm already very public about my experience, as you pointed out, because of Story of a Rape Survivor, which is the performance that we have based on Shahrazad's photographing of me. And then also I've been in a number of documentaries. I mean, this is part of my life's work is to not want anyone else to ever experience sexual violence, right? And so if my story can help people heal, but also prevent someone from doing it, that's what I've been anointed to do on some way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I thought, how do I weave myself into this story? One, it's just a strategy as a writer. I thought, that difference between what I thought the book was going to be and what it became, by having access to someone like Oprah Winfrey or having access to someone like Alice Walker, who are very, very open about their lives in a lot of ways, gave me permission. As a critic, I always have to, I charge myself with rising to the occasion of the artist that I'm writing about. And so you can see that in my work. Sometimes it's like labor intensive, like just because like the thing I'm writing about, like I gotta do a lot of scaffolding for you to appreciate the thing I'm writing about, because I have a distance from it, or I'm not that excited about it. But when I am moved, when I'm enamored, when I'm in love with the thing I'm writing about, then it forces me to like just change the way I write, and I have to find myself. If I want you to see the beauty that I see, and so my writing has to be as beautiful and has to be as convincing. So I think, and I just think vulnerability is both part of how I live in the world, but also as a writer, I think I'm okay with appearing insecure, which is like I think a strategy of mine. I wrote an essay a couple of years ago. Not an essay, a profile on Solange for Elle. It was my first cover story. And so I start off in that story with just being uncertain of what I should wear, because I'm about to meet Solange, and the outfit I brought with me, it's like, you go to New Orleans. It was a winter storm here in New Jersey. I go to New Orleans. It's like 80 degrees, and I'm dressed like someone for winter, right? So, and I start the essay with all of that like uncertainty and insecurity. And I think it's just a way that it's true. And also I think it's a way that maybe you as a reader then will be like, you'll let go. You won't be as, you're disarmed in a way. And so then therefore you may be able to let the words fall on you differently than you would have if I presented a super confident chic self or something. So.
Do you use that when you're teaching about The Color Purple? That sense of vulnerability and insecurity? Like,
I don't know about The Color Purple. I use it when I'm teaching though in general, but
okay.
The Color Purple, I don't know if I'm that, I feel like I'm pretty much like pretty confident in like what I have to say about the book. I think I admit I had taught class today, and I'm like, I haven't read most of the books of the syllabus, so it's a grand adventure for all of us. And so I apologize. I'm like, I don't know how these books are going to be, so bear with me. So I am. I mean, that's just me. It's not like it's a fake self. It's a pretty. Yeah, I'm neurotic and anxious and all those things, and so I don't know if I can contain it really, and nor do I want to pretend to be someone other than who I am. So, but as a writer, I do find it to be there's different ways that narrators get you to trust them. There's a book that we read last year. He's very controversial, so right now, but Emmanuel Lecare is like a French writer who has a lot going on right now in his particular career, but he makes you dislike him as a narrator. And so therefore, if you dislike him, then maybe you kind of trust what he says. And so the controversies right now are about like whether we should trust what he says and stuff like that. But yeah. I thought that was an interesting strategy to make yourself unlikable. I'm like, that's one way. And then people use all these other strategies to pull you in as a reader. So
that's interesting. So you talked earlier about that experience, like that picture of you sitting on the couch with Alice Walker, right? And it's very clear you don't meet somebody. I don't know if it's the first time that you had ever met her.
Yeah, it was.
It was. So I can't imagine that you meet somebody for the first time and you invite them to come sit on your couch with you, with a shared blanket while you all are cozy.
That was the second day. First day, I don't think she has to get to know us. So well, second.
Well, I mean, Alice may be different from me, but I'm not inviting nobody on my couch.
Unless
the trust got built.
I had a lot of people, a lot of people vouch for me. So Gloria Steinem and Beverly Guy Sheptall, who write the forward and afterward. of the book, or very close to Alice, and then Valerie Boyd, who is working on her. So Valerie Boyd's famous for being the Zora Neale Hurston biographer,
Yeah.
but she's also working on Alice's journals. And so the three of them, I think, those are really important, and they're very good filters, I think. And so I think she was a little primed that I may not be, someone, but she didn't know who my sister was. So I was supposed to stay at Alice's house. This was the whole thing, which I don't probably talk about in the book as much, but I was supposed to stay at her house, just Salamisha. And then I have this person coming, and so she doesn't know who Scheherazade is. So then we end up staying at a hotel that I talk about in the book, down the road. And then when she meets Scheherazade, it's like souls recognizing each other because they're both healers.
Yeah.
And so then it was like, I'm so happy that Scheherazade came, because it was just me. I don't know if I would have been on the couch the next day. Scheherazade was really, they really understood each other on a soul level, that I think, on a cellular or soul level, that I thought was pretty remarkable. So it was nice to have Scheherazade there for a number of reasons. But yeah, I think, in general. Well, I think if Nadine had, someone or other close friends, or Sharianne, I said, Salamisha wants to come interview, you probably would have been a little bit open.
I will promise you that no matter what Nadine says about somebody I have not known for years, I'll be on the couch with them in that way. I love my sister. I trust her deeply, but nah.
Not a couch. Okay. Nadine, you hear that? So I think we should, do you want to open it up, see if there are any questions in the chat?
Absolutely.
I can't see. Are there any questions in the chat that people would like to ask us before we? I don't know.
And if that, I'm not seeing, I'm seeing some comments. When we as women respect and understand our importance and strength, we see other Black women in love and respect and encourage one another. And that is absolutely true. So we definitely want to invite anyone to, if you have questions or reflections that you want to share, please use the chat as an opportunity to ask questions of.
Oh, here it is. I see. It's a Q&A. You got to go Q&A. Okay. Oh, wow. I forgot. You see it?
Yeah. So Kristen asks, what do you think about queerness in the book, especially as it pertains to Shug's performances? Do you see her queerness represented in the way that she performs, or performs the songs performs, or the songs she chooses to sing?
Yeah, great question. Well, I would want to say that one of the biggest controversies about the movie, and I'm going to tell it from 2 points of view, is the character Shug. So my book is broken up into 3 sections: Celie, Shug, and Sophia, and it's the book, the movie, and the musical. And Shug, so when Alice Walker agrees to signing on to Steven Spielberg and Quincy Jones doing this movie, they actually offer her to write they give her first rights at the script. So Alice Walker writes this, she's panicking, but she writes this remarkable script called Watch Me at Sunset, or The Color Purple, because she's like not sure if whatever she's writing is going to be the actual movie. And Shug's life so the biggest difference between Alice Walker's script for The Color Purple and the book is Shug. She gives Shug an even more elaborate world. And Shug's and Celie's relationship is even in more depth and greater detail. So she writes this, and Alice herself is going through deep questions. She's in a relationship in which her partner is cheating on her. She herself is questioning her relationship and her attraction to women. And then they're also filming, and she's, suffering from Lyme disease. So she's going through all these inner turmoils as a person. And then they don't choose her script. They have another writer. And so by the time we see the movie, or by the time the movie is done, Shug's character is reduced significantly, not just from Alice's script, but from the book itself. And so the suggestion of their relationship versus a full-blown relationship is one of the I think the saddest moments for Alice Walker. And so that's kind of why I include Mickalene Thomas's reimagining of the film in the book, because with Mickalene, who really is focused for Mickalene Thomas, when she's like a teenager and she sees the movie with her mother, her mother identifies with Celie, but McElwain, this young artist, but she's a young woman, she's a teenager at the time. When she sees these two women on the scene, when she sees Celie and Suge kiss, it changes everything for her. And it gives her the possibility to be an artist that shows Black women's body and their lives and their desire for each other in a full breadth of her work. So I think Suge, the movie is more suggestive than Walker wanted, but even in that suggestion, and even with the censors, she calls it the censor's knife, even with the censoring of their relationship, there were still possibilities for another generation. Mm-hmm. Was The Color Purple the best novel ever read by me? I mean, I don't know if it's one of the best. I had to do this podcast the other day, and it was like with Mark Lamont Hill, and he has this game, it's burn it, buy it, and borrow it. And I'm not going to tell you what I said, but I did The Color Purple. I think I bought The Color Purple. I think that was one. It was hard. I think it was those 3 books that I mentioned, like Bluest Eye, or there was just a lot. But yeah, The Color Purple is definitely one of the most significant books for me, obviously. But I'm a big fan of beloved like Jackie and Jazz. And there's just so many novels that have meant so much to me. So, but The Color Purple is top 3.
And Michael asks again, what is your opinion of Alice Walker as a novelist? Why is she not credited as one of the greats by the general public?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there's a number, I mean, it's, I think part of the backlash against Alice Walker affected, and even though she won the Pulitzer, she won the National Book Award, she was the first Black woman to win the Pulitzer. There's ways in which that kind of captures both her brilliance, but also makes it difficult to see the work after The Color Purple. Yeah. And she has a book that's so fascinating. The Color Purple characters live on in Alice Walker's books in so many different ways. So The Temple of My Familiar, you see Suge and Celie as older women in the South who have a very healthy relationship, like stuff that you can't imagine now, but seeing older Black women who've lived a life together. Yeah. And then she has other works that other characters kind of appear in. So I think there's ways in which people kind of confine her to this moment. She also has been writing, hasn't written a novel in a very long time. So most of her work she blogs a lot, poetry and essays. Now, I also think it's interesting that her early work is so undervalued because it's some of the most, it's Thaddeus Davis, a former colleague of mine at Penn and a mentor, writes about Alice Walker being one of the most important Southern writers, hands down, America's ever seen. And so that, I think if you want to kind of go back to pre-Color Purple work as well, it's enormous and it's really just rewarding.
Well, we'll encourage people to continue to add questions. So let me ask you what question did you not get to ask Alice Walker or Oprah Winfrey that you really wish you would have been able to ask?
Oh, I don't know. Well, I wish I got to see Oprah's house, but I didn't get to see that. So I talk about that in the book. That was really sad for me. Just because, it's like the promised land. What did I not, about the book?
Or about anything. I was thinking initially about the book or
about the book is fine.
Yeah, but about anything.
I don't know. It sounds terrible because I don't know. I'm sure there are questions. I'm sure I had things I had to figure out. Well, I did have to return to her. I really wanted to have access. I didn't have access to the journal, so I didn't know how she sketched out these characters. And she sent me one, so I got one, and I was like, oh my god, like let me see if I could see the other ones. And then she didn't respond because I was like, oh my god, like how did she imagine these characters? Like how did she outline them and prepare to have them and things like that? So that was really I wish I had more time for that. And then with Oprah, I don't know. I feel like I got to speak to her at a very significant moment. So in the book, I talk about our conversation takes place after the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. And so we're really in that space of someone, Dr. Ford not being believed. And so that was really pretty a deep moment because we're both crying, and it was just, as survivors, to share that moment at that time was really remarkable. I don't know. Maybe I would have asked Oprah. Like she's never gone to therapy, and I always think that's kind of interesting as a model of healing.
Yeah.
That she never, like, how did she actually, the public nature of her, the testimonies that she had heard over and over was her way of working through her pain, which I find remarkable, never to have gone to therapy. And how does that really work? Like, how do you, for me, that's hard, but have you navigated ACT as a place isn't so open to creativity and activism? How I've navigated academia and until I got here, I guess, I felt like I didn't necessarily, that the academia is not a place that should determine your activism, meaning that the ways in which you are promoted or the ways that you're evaluated here academia isn't a fit place to determine one's political output. And so I had to understand that the work I did outside of the academy was the work I was doing outside the academy, until I was able to come here where there's a lot more possibility to see those identities as integrated. But you're right, it's just a different, it's not always so open to activism or to alternative forms of writing, which is another way of saying creative writing. But so yeah, I think I had to figure out ways of doing the work that I was supposed to be doing, and then doing these other things. And then ironically, I suppose, that created the possibility for me to be able to do them all the way I want to. So it's charting your own path, but you have to attend to the rules as they are presented to you as you're trying to surmount them and get around them, I guess. I don't know. I mean, it sounds like it's just a workaholic, but I don't know if that's like how everybody should be. I always like feel bad to tell grad students that. I'm like, I don't know if but this is how I did it anyway. So how I do it.
And universities aren't the only places where you've taught. So you talked in the book about teaching young African-American men, high school boys, The Color Purple, and about how different their reaction was from the kind of public backlash from other men in the African-American community. And like, how do you make sense of that? And how did you teach that the Color Purple to them in a way that sort of allowed for the beautiful kind of conversation that you were able to develop with them?
Yeah, the 80s were a very specific period in time, with Reagan as the president, and the cruel backlash against Black people, particularly the emergence of all sorts of stereotypes like the welfare queen and the crack baby. And there are ways in which Black people were just deeply under siege in the 80s. And so I think by the time I'm teaching the novel a little bit later, we're not embroiled in those same kinds of, we're still experiencing racism and sexism, but we're not embroiled in that same kind of war, so to speak, against Black people. It's a different one, but it's not that one. So that's one. And I also think they didn't see themselves in Albert. Yeah. Like they saw themselves. It was really kind of mind blowing. Like I was like ready for them to like battle with these arguments, and they like knew every word, and they were like really invested in Celie and Nettie's relationship. And so it speaks to the power of The Color Purple, but also one of the things I wanted to achieve in this book, by including the interviews with Danny Glover and Quincy Jones, was that The Color Purple became a film in large part because there were these Black men who were committed to this story, and they saw their mothers or they saw their grandmothers in Celie. And I think that's pretty remarkable. And it's a kind of something I actually didn't know until I did this book. And so it was important for me to include their voices, as well as the voices of the young, of the boys who watched the film that I taught to, because it does offer an alternative to this narrative that I do present here of this resistance to the book by Black men. That in fact, what do we learn from the ones who want to make it more accessible, who see themselves as part of the stories of the women, as opposed to seeing themselves solely in Albert. And so I think And that's the large part, the Black men that have been in my life are more similar to that than not. So I think I wanted to pay recognition to that, but also to highlight that. Okay, looks like we have another question, and then we can, wrap up soon. Okay, wow, these are real questions though. What do you think of the character of Mr. I only read the book once. I loved it. I always think about the senior at the end of the book where he's sewing. Oh, it's such a good scene. It always comes to my mind when I think question of restorative justice through trauma. Yes, yes, I completely agree with you about Albert as a figure. What we would say in literary terms, he's a prefigure, but literally he's a figure of restorative justice, meaning that he's a figure who goes through an arc of atonement and forgiveness seeking mission and makes amends in order to be reconciled to the community. And so Albert is just a rare, amazing figure in American literature. And the musical, I think, does a really, really good job as so one of the controversies with the movie for both Alice and I think people in general was that Mr's an unfulfilled character. We see him at the end of the movie and he's not part of the family. He's watching them from afar. And in the musical and in the book, he is included in the community. Not easily included in the community, but he has gone through great lengths to attend to the trauma that he has inflicted on Celie, to the point where he even asked her to marry him again, right? And then, like that takes not the first time when they married, but the second time. She looks at him in the musical with a laugh and a stare. But they had gotten that's how much healing had been done that he could naively ask her to marry him again. And so I find, and I read end the book with this, and we can talk about this a little bit, but yeah, I just think Albert's he's an elusive character for me in some ways, because we've yet to see Albert on the national stage as a real person, but it's the gift that Alice Walker gives us as a community, as a people, and as a nation, I think, to have Albert as someone whose arc that we could follow when we harm people.
Yeah. So if there are any other questions, we can take a moment to answer those final questions. Michael asked, can creative writing be taught or not?
Yeah, I think so, hopefully, because I don't know. I mean, people take creative writing classes. I think so. I think craft can be, it's a good question. Can it be taught? I think there are spaces that we can be in together where we learn how to hone our craft. And so that may be a different way of thinking about it. I don't know if because I came to this creative writing differently than maybe a fiction writer or a poet. I came to it as someone who's trained in another language of literary criticism and really wanted to become a different kind of writer. And so I then approach my classes and my process of writing in that spirit of learning as I'm teaching. So I don't, some of my classes may feel a little bit more informal in that sense. Like I'm saying, like I'm reading books like I haven't read yet because I'm like curious. Because for most of my career, I was teaching particular types of texts and particular types of books, and so I still do that. But I teach very different kind of books now too, where I'm really trying to figure out what the story is, or how do you communicate? How does the writer? I'm teaching a class right now. Last year, I taught a class which was really moving but very challenging as the pandemic came to be, called The Art of Death. And so we were like, in January, it was like, oh, okay. In March, we were like, oh, okay. Yeah. So it was actually quite healing, I think, for lots of us, because been thinking about as the pandemic we were being enveloped in the pandemic. But this semester I'm teaching a class called Writing About Things We Love. And so hopefully, we're on a different vibe. And it'll be interesting to see what we come up with. So that's how I'm approaching this class.
So you mentioned love as a virtue. So I'm going to ask you this last question, and then we'll wrap up. If you think about The Color Purple as, and In Search of the Color Purple as like two books that have something to say to people in this particular sociopolitical moment that we're in, where people have lost so much hope and people are struggling to find joy. What do these two books tell us that we can take into the next week, the next year, about how to make it through this moment?
Yeah, and I have a question for you, then we can end. But my question is much more bland. So why don't I ask you your question and I'll answer your question.
Okay.
My question for you was, why did you have to turn to The Color Purple as a for your master's thesis in psychology?
Because I think I was dying. So I was in a graduate program in clinical psych where everything we were reading in class about Black people was about violence and early pregnancy and social chaos. And it's not like those things don't exist in our community, but they don't only exist in our community. And I didn't know how to articulate why it felt so bad, right? And why it felt so wrong to have to constantly battle with my professors, who are all white, about that's not the totality of us. They'd gotten so used to flattening us in research, and I didn't know what else to reach for. So the only thing I could reach for were books, because I grew up reading, and sort of that's where my joy was. And like authors, Black authors in particular, say things that make me feel like I'm being seen, right? So it was the only thing I could reach for that made me feel seen. So I somehow convinced my thesis advisor to let me do this work on The Color Purple and Beloved. And the thesis itself was on Black women's ways of coping, right? And yeah, so, and there weren't enough Black women for me to interview at the time, because I was a first year grad student in a place where, in Ann Arbor, where at the time there weren't that many Black folks. So it was really because I was suffocating and I didn't know anything else to do but to reach for Black women's words. And that got me through and gave me a bridge to be able to stay in graduate school, because I was also about to leave grad school at the end of my first year, packed my stuff up, and I was like, I'm done. And that got me to the point where I was like, this is where we speak, is in these books, in these ways. So
yeah, that's powerful.
Wow. Let me survive.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I didn't know what the answer was. So thank you for sharing that. I guess, what I think these two books, and I'll show them, and Source of Knowledge has them, so please get them from Source of Knowledge. Here's to really appreciate my cover, you have to see the original cover. So there's like a house and stuff like that, trees. And I guess, I thought we're in the middle of a traumatic experience, both between the pandemic and post-Trump, and the hope and the desire to move past this when we're in a sustained traumatic experience. It's almost that those are two different things, that we're going to have to figure out how to integrate this trauma. We're not the same people that we were a year ago. We are fundamentally different people. And a year ago and then 4 years ago, let's just put those two time stamps there. But really a year ago, that changed everything. And then, so I guess for me, these books give us permission to figure out ways of having to integrate these traumas into our new selves, and meaning that there's no way of going back to what was. And so if that's the condition that we find ourselves in, then who do we want to be, and how do we get to a place of wholeness given what we've just been through? And I think that these two books are really about a quest to be whole in spite of the traumas that have happened to me as a person, or to Alice Walker's family. And so I guess that's the gift. I think now more than ever, I didn't know, The Color Purple felt like it was a little like off topic when I was writing the book. I'm like, oh yeah. And then if you ever we need healing more than ever. I mean, that's the language, like, and it's also, that's why I started with Biden, both in his acceptance speech and then in his inauguration speech. Heal is the dominant verb.
Yeah.
And so these are healing books more than anything else. I think there are testaments to the power of art to heal, help heal, to community as a place of healing, and to acknowledge one's suffering in order to be able to be anew. So I think that's what I don't know. I hope that's at least part of the journey that you experience when you read my book, and it's definitely the journey that you experience when you read The Color Purple. So
It's beautiful.
thank you.
Well,
So thank you everyone for joining us. I don't know, Christina, do you appear back or how do we?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. On behalf of the Departments of African American and African Studies, the Newark Black Women's Writers Workshop, and our partner, Bookstore and Community Center's Source of Knowledge here in Newark, we appreciate your attention into this engaging conversation. And to Salamisha, thank you so much for going in search of The Color Purple and bringing back to life and to fore Alice Walker's incredible work. Our dean, Jacqueline Mattis.
I know, hello,
And
this is our dean.
and our executive vice chancellor, Sherry Ann Butterfield. Thank you so very much for creating the space and for really being a support for our faculty to do their heart's work. And
Thank you,
we're
Christina.
just so
for-
grateful to you all.
Thank you, Christina, for the purple and the music. That was amazing. I do play that for my students a lot. So Christina, thank you.
Yeah, so this is Source of Knowledge right here in Newark. You know, anyone that's familiar with our university, you know that we say, and we mean it, we are not just in Newark, but we're of Newark. Please buy local. Again, Source of Knowledge is open. Please bring your masks if you want to stop on Broad Street to the store, but they are shipping as well. Their link is in the chat. Thank you all so much. Stay safe.
And thank you,
Thank
Salamisha.
you. No, thank you,
Thank
Jackie.
you.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Sherry Ann.
Everyone.
Okay, bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.